va a durar aproximadamente 2 horas.
The session will last about 2 hours, and we will have Luis Escungi leading it. He's from Italy. I was just saying that we're going to have a 2-hour session. This is an organization called SOMO, the Counter. I imagine that you must have heard of it. SOMO does research and investigation on financial flows and structures of companies. The SOMO representative that we will hear from, Luis Escungi, is Italian, and he will do his presentation in English. And basically, his presentation will be divided in 2 parts. In the first part, he will be explaining why is it important to investigate companies. Then we will find out about this topic of points of pressure and how to get to those. And in the end, he will be sharing a very concrete example. SOMO has also sent, for the legal workshops that we will be having this afternoon, small practical evidence to be incorporated in our workshops. Adil Melendez Marquez, who's working in the workshop together with Francisco and with the input of other experts, will try to incorporate this exercise there.
Now to sort of let Luis, are you online?
Sí, te escucho. ¿Me escucha?
Okay, great. Spanish. I understand you're gonna do the talk in English, right?
Yes, I can briefly just say hello to everyone in Spanish, and then for the presentation I would prefer yes with the translation, please.
Excellent. We have simultaneous translation, so that's really great. Okay, I'll let you then go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It is a pleasure and an honor to be sharing my experience and my investigative abilities. Unfortunately, my Spanish is not as good so as to make the whole presentation in Spanish. So due to this reason, I'll be addressing you in English. Just one question. Can you see my presentation as a PowerPoint? Yes. Thank you. I will switch to English now and I will begin.
First of all, a little bit of introduction about myself. I am Luis Cunjo, and I work as a corporate researcher at SOMO, which is an NGO in the Netherlands specialized in investigating multinational corporations with a specific focus on the negative impacts that companies have on people and environment, identify the structure that enable corporate power to stand in the way of more equitable, democratic, and sustainable world. And SOMO exists from more than 50 years and works with civil society movements and organizations from all over the world. And today I'm presenting as part of a project of SOMO called the Counter that provides corporate research assistance to activists on a pro bono basis. I will explain about the Counter in my second part of the session. But just briefly saying, before working at SOMO, that is my job since 1 year. I worked in the business and human rights field for a decade, including for grassroots NGOs in Asia that are impacted by companies that are involved in the garment and energy sector. But today I will speak for, yes, more or less 1 hour and leaving space for some question and answer about the following topic. So the first part, it is about why conducting corporate research and why it is important to identify the actors that enable harmful projects to happen. Then I will spend a little bit of time just to get an understanding of what pressure points are when doing investigation and why they are important for casework development. And the first part closes with the presentation of a case study that some of you in the room might be familiar with, which is the Cesar blood call, involving very harmful and violent mining project in Cesar region in Colombia. And in the second part, I will share a little bit about the help desk that I work for, which is the counter. So starting with the why corporate research might be relevant for the work of activists. I will start by saying that in the unjust world that we witness, that is driven by profit interest, we witness forced eviction to make way to agribusiness, child labor in the mining projects, deforestation of high biodiversity areas, carbon emission by polluting industry, and many other human rights and environmental harms caused by company operation. In many places across the world, government officials unfortunately do little to resolve this harm, as they either have no interest or little possibility to go against the interest of powerful corporations. The result is that even if national laws prohibit companies to pollute or exploit workers or destroy forests, the institutional governance is rather weak. And sometimes communities trying to resolve harm by using their country's legal and administrative system see their concern dismissed. Local activists speaking out about their problems are harassed, and community protests are repressed. And NGOs in this institutional setting that are weak try to support affected communities by communicating concern, for instance, to national and local regulators, sending petition, mobilizing on the streets, and show their discontents about how a company is behaving badly and causing damages. And it is extremely important that civil society continue to put pressure on domestic decision makers, because even if they are unwilling to go against the company interests now, they might decide to hold companies accountable at a later stage. For instance, with a shift in the government. And second, because this mobilization at local level shows that corporate malpractice are not addressed, and the solutions that they propose are not adequate. Nevertheless, it's also important to stress that business enterprise themselves have responsibilities to respect human rights. And not only the company that caused the harms directly have responsibility, but also other business enterprise that have a relationship with them have responsibility to address the impacts on the ground. And the company responsibilities is a very known concept that has been incorporated in various instruments, until now mostly non-binding. For example, the United Nations principle on business and human rights, or the OECD guidelines. And a binding treaty is on the way, hopefully will come soon in the next few years. And in Europe, there is also some legislation coming up about companies' due diligence on responsibility. But the reason I point out to companies have a responsibility and their business partner rather and they can be like relationships that are based on financial exchange, on insurance policies, on buy and seller relationship. All these actors can be identified as connected to harms that happen in a specific context. So, by conducting corporate research and mapping out the different companies that enable a project to exist and other businesses linked to this company to profit from their harms, you can find out that this harmful corporate operation is, for example, connected to a bigger corporate group, or that they are controlled by influential stakeholders or influential businessmen. Maybe they have a connection to political decision maker, or they may even be connected to corporate groups that are located very far away from where the harms happen. And this means that while communities, for example, indigenous facing threat of displacement for this mine in a remote area in Colombia, see the threats and risks at local level, risk regarding the destruction of their livelihood, what enables that company to realize that project is a network of corporate actors that are at different level contributing to that harm, localizing in that context. And unfortunately, communities see only this mining company threatening their livelihood, but they don't really know who is behind, who is this network of businesses that enable the company to exist. Here on the left side of the slide is a very basic scheme of what I mean with a network of companies beyond the local offenders. And in the middle, there is a red box, which is like that indicates the harmful project, and identify the corporate enablers of what this harmful project is, involves looking at the chain of investors, and this would be the box on top in light blue. And this might involve, for example, that the local company operating in Colombia, in rural Cambodia, is a subsidiary of a larger corporate groups, including, for example, a parent company that operates or is registered in another country, in Europe, in the United States, or wherever else. And it is also important to understand who owns this company, because they are basically the corporate decision makers of what is going on. And so, for example, if the companies are listed on stock exchange, the shareholders are basically the owners of this company. Another very important part of the chain of investors regards the financial structure that enables this company to raise money in order to invest in that specific mining activity in rural Colombia. And this involves commercial banks, development banks, and many different instruments that are made possible to the offending companies. But behind the financing, there is other actors that might be investigated and identified during corporate research. And here I include the insurance company that basically insure investors, but also the financier, the parent company, about different aspects of risk that the investor bear by conducting that mining project in rural Colombia. Other actors can be also export credit agency that are national agency that puts public money in for the realization of that harmful mine in a foreign country, in this case, Colombia. Then looking at instead at the box yellow at the bottom, there are the other corporate enablers, because once a project is operational, in order to be a viable business, they have to generate profits. And the easiest way to generate profits is to sell their outputs to a very big, different type of actors. And of course, if we are talking about a mining project, there is certain type of actors that we will encounter along the supply chain. For example, companies that own smelters, companies that trades the ore, the metal ore, or we will have ultimate buyers, and all these network of actors across the supply chain can be very variegated. In the case, for example, of energy project like an hydropower dam, usually there is one buyer, which is most of the case would be the national electricity company. So in order to, in this case, to investigate the chain of supplier, it's important a little bit to understand how the specific company industry that you want to investigate works. But going back to the points that I made at the beginning, I repeat, usually communities see the company that's own the harmful project, but all these other actors that supports that company, they all have responsibility to ensure that human rights abuses and environmental destruction does not happen. So, and this brings me to another concept that I want to share with you, which is the concept of pressure points. And this is because not all companies with a relationship to the harmful project are the same, because some of these actors might be more responsive to community concern, others less. And pressure points can be defined as a type of actor across this network of enablers of the harmful project that are possible to target for advocacy. And they can be targeted for two main reasons. One is because they have a great influence on the company that is conducting the malpractice. And second, it's because they might take social and environmental concern more seriously and therefore be more responsive to advocates that reach them out, asking to use their leverage to address the situation. Here it's a little list of what makes a pressure point as such. So first of all, pressure points is definitely proportional to the amount of money that they provide in order for the projects that cause harm to realize. to be realized. So the more money they provide to the project, more influence they have, and therefore they can be targeted for advocacy. So, for example, banks providing large loans or buyers that buy most of the project output. Pressure points are also, for example, companies that are publicly listed on stock exchange. And they are pressure points in this case because they are likely to be more sensitive to issue that may damage their reputation because of the bad publicity. And this bad publicity can affect directly their financial returns, with shareholders not willing to be associated with the harms and therefore selling their shares. Another another feature of a pressure point across like the companies that appear in a project investment value chain are those companies that have made social and environmental commitments. Because they don't because they don't respect this commitment, they risk to lose credibility, and again, their reputation could be at stake. Sometimes social environmental safeguards and commitments are also associated with a non-judicial grievance redress mechanism. For example, we have a development bank that have policy on how they respect human rights, on how they minimize environmental risk, and they have a watchdog mechanism that can be used as an entry point to bring these actors to account for the harms that they are contributing to. Other feature of pressure points are companies that are registered in OECD countries. I will explain a little bit more about what OECD countries is very soon, but briefly I can say that OECD is an international organization made up of more or less 50 countries with advanced economies. And this organization has developed a number of standards and guidelines that relates to investment and trades, including how corporate governance should be structured and also how companies have to respect human rights and environment. Other characteristics of pressure points are companies that are operating or are registered in other countries with relatively strong laws and regulation. As I mentioned briefly before, some countries, for example, are in the journey to implement mandatory human rights due diligence laws. So far, it's only a handful of countries in Europe, like France and Germany, but the European Union, about less than 3 weeks ago, passed a directive on human rights and environmental due diligence that will become law for 27 member states in the next 5 years. Again, other pressure points can be characterized as those companies that have certification from sustainability bodies. And this certification scheme, of course, are very problematic. We know, for example, how the roundtable on sustainable palm oil can sometimes cover up very awful deforestation, or as we will see later, like how the Better Coal initiative can be abused. However, certification schemes are also good leverage point for the activists, because companies obtaining these certificates basically want to assure their customers that they are producing in accordance with specific social, environmental, and economic standards. So if a company that's labeled their products as sustainably made, but instead they are connected to a mining company throughout their, for instance, their buying relationship, that could be like used against that company in order to demand that they act in order to address the harms. Last but not least, the pressure points are also companies that have that are well-known consumer brands. For example, if harms are connected to big garment brands like Nike or Adidas, or if a project is directly or indirectly financed by the World Bank Group that promotes itself as being a development bank. Or again, if big car brands like Mercedes, Volkswagen, BMW are connected to a specific harmful mine. So these are some of the features that qualify a company as an interesting pressure point for advocacy. And does not mean that a pressure points include all these features, but it can qualify as pressure points and therefore as a company that can be targeted for advocacy by having one, two of these features. So just like to link back to the corporate networks that enable harmful company to exist, we can say that the flow starts with investigating who is behind the company, and so try to identify as much as possible who is the parent company, who is the business partners, who is financing the project, who is providing insurance, etc., or who is buying from them. And then a second aspect of the research is to make an analysis of all these actors that enable an harmful project to exist and assess whether or not they can be used for advocacy purposes. And so check if a buyer, a financier, or an insurer have made, for example, social environmental commitments, or if they are public companies, or if they are registered in jurisdiction with laws that might enable them to account for their association with the harms. I will then now try to explain a little bit how these come together by presenting a couple of slides of a case study that SOMO has worked on for a decade, I think, and that many of you in the room might be familiar with. I will not spend much time about the case context because it's very well known, but briefly saying, during civil unrest between 1996 and 2006, more than 3,000 people have been killed and over 50,000 displaced from their land to make ways to coal mines in the northern Colombian province of Cesar. And victims and survivors have not received redress for the injustice and they continue to be threatened. I will leave the case context here, otherwise it will take too much time. But going like more in the research side, we started this research several years ago, and we figured out that that these coal mining concessions were given to companies called, for instance, La Loma and Descanso, that are two subsidiaries of a US-based mining company called Drummond. And that two other concessions called La Celanturitas and La Agua were owned by another Swiss headquartered multinational called Glencore. At the time, we had tried to identify who are the investor and the owner of this US-based and Swiss-based multinational, their financiers, and to see where the money were coming from. But and we found, for instance, some interesting shareholders which themselves had made the sustainability commitment with regards to Glencore shares. But this was not really enough to qualify them as strong pressure points because it was quite of a legacy of issues. And also finding this information back in the day was a little bit difficult. So, and this explains also like another important point I did not mention before. Finding all the actors in each as insurers and buyers and bankers and financiers and insurers is not an easy task. Sometimes you only have information about the buyers, sometimes only who financed what. And so, and if this qualified as pressure points, then you have to go with what you have and try to exert the pressure on who you think might be responsive to advocacy. So in the case of Cesar, we did not find very promising pressure points in the investor value chain. But instead, we focus on the supply chain actors. And by looking at corporate disclosure, annual reports, trade data, and many other sources, we identified nearly a dozen buyers from the Cesar coal mines. Among these more or less 10, 12 buyers, there were 4 companies that in total were responsible for purchasing more than 100 million tons of coal from the two multinationals. And these 4 companies were distributing, were buying the coal, shipping in Europe, and distributing it across Europe since between 2009 and 2017, more or less. And the research also identified that these 4 companies imported coal in Europe through specific ports located in the Netherlands, and before then selling it to power plants operators in the Netherlands, but also across Europe. And so from there, we started to make an analysis of on whether or not these buyers could be qualified as pressure points. Here you have the names, that's REW, Uniper, NG, and Vattenfall. And this name might not be very familiar to attendants in the room, but they are very big energy players in Europe. 2 are from Germany, another one is French. But what was important for us is that, first of all, they are all so-called consumer-facing brands, are very well-known corporations. Second, and despite all of them come from different countries, they all operate in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is one of these OECD countries that have an office, a government office that is responsible for implementing, that is responsible to ensure that companies operating in the Netherlands respect guidelines on responsible corporate behavior. So this was the second element that we identified to qualify these actors as pressure points. And the third element is that the history of the Caesar mine, so that human rights violations in Caesar were known since years. There were, for example, judicial proceedings both in Colombia and the United States against the US multinational. And in the Netherlands itself, it was known that there was coal coming from Caesar to Europe, and there were done like few voluntary initiatives, including the Better Coal initiative that involved these four companies, but this initiative did not really address their situation lived by the displaced communities. And so this said is that the case was long-standing. Companies knew that by purchasing the coal, they were complicit of the human rights violation suffered by the rural communities in Cesar. And therefore, there was this kind of knowledge-based continuous business relationship. So this to say this was like the analysis about the pressure point. And we also, and the research also that we did in phases also in 2021, 2022, highlighted that around 2007, the coal shipped to the Netherlands dropped. And so these buyers were not complicit anymore. But with the start of the Russia-Ukrainian war, more coal started back to be imported in the Netherlands from Cesar. So this is like an overview of the research side and identification of pressure points. What we did with that is here. So first of all, SOMO built on a partnership that has been, again, long-standing for years, that included a local community-based organization that is a member of La Via Campesina. We also work with Pax for Peace, an international NGO that has a presence in Colombia and also in the Netherlands. And we also worked, but less formally, with another group that I'm pretty sure we all know, that is AIDA, but that is not really part of the advocacy trajectory that I'm gonna introduce now. So what we did is that we filed, SOMO and communities and partners filed a complaint to the national contact points of the Netherlands in April 2023 against the four companies that I mentioned before, but also against the port authorities of Amsterdam and Rotterdam that are private public companies that oversee the operation within the big ports and harbors. And the complaint itself argued that despite these buyers had human rights due diligence obligation under the OECD guidelines, also with regards to their buyer role, they failed to take sufficient action to address the severe human rights impacts caused by their suppliers in Cesar. And the The complaint is quite complex. It goes through specific articles and sections of the OECD guidelines on multinational corporation, and as well OECD guidelines on due diligence. But it's public, and for who's interested, I can share later. But what is important to know is that the NCP complaint was the result of one end of a story that and an advocacy trajectory that started long time before with a campaign, basically. Then an action in 2003 followed up when we saw more coal entering in the Netherlands after the Russia-Ukraine war. And so the NCP complaint was one of the action advocacy done together with many other activities. For example, we also invited the representative of the communities and of the local NGO to present the case at a Dutch parliament hearing in order to get political and media attention. There were also demonstrations in front of the port authorities, buildings, and etc. Now, and I'm gonna close the first part here. I can just say that the NCP complaint is not per se the solution to the problem. It's not that the NCP complaint itself will bring benefits to the community suffering in Cesar, but it's part of a broader strategy made of community mobilization, parliamentary hearing, etc., in order to exert more and more pressure on the buyers so that the buyers can use their leverage on the operators of the mines to finance remediation action. And the case is now, before the NCP is now still ongoing, is within like the admissibility phase, which is an initial phase for the people of the national contact point to assess if it's eligible or not. And we have exchanged with them, and there is, and we will soon enter into a mediation phase in order to help communities to try to get, for instance, they intend to have like agricultural support, scholarship for the kids, etc. And by also using the NCP, the OECD guidelines, we also try to leverage broader policy developments around the company's responsibility along the supply chain relationship. I will perhaps stop now with this first part.
No comments. Also we have people online who are advisors to Route to Justice, Borislav Preternov, and Irene, Darin, and also Sophie. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to sort of speak. Yeah? Okay, good. So if there are no more questions, Luis, do you want to carry on with the second part of the presentation? I believe you're going to introduce us to the counter, right?
Yes, it's really up to you. If you feel like that the mood in the room needs like a 5 minutes break for a coffee, water, etc., I'm happy like to hold on here. Otherwise, I can start. So to introduce to the counter, it's important to have a little bit of background information about the organization that hosts this platform. Because as I mentioned earlier, like SOMO is an investigative non-governmental organization, that and one of the things that we've done in the last 10, 15 years was to provide corporate research assistance to groups working in the public interest, and largely this assistance was through service assignment being paid with a fee. And these trajectories has helped SOMO to develop corporate research abilities in a variety of industries and to investigate, for instance, corporate structure, financial data, trade information that's for projects and companies that commit wrongdoings across the world. And based on that expertise, and thanks to the support of two donors, SOMO launched the counter in September 2023 to provide corporate research assistance to activists on a pro bono basis. We are now a team of 5 researchers, including myself and the project manager, but we also rely on colleagues within SOMO that are expert on specific topics. So the counter is a help desk that provides research support on free of charge to help movements and civil society to fill the knowledge gap about who are the actors behind corporate harmful practices. By applying the follow the money methodology, meaning like follow where the money flows, we assist movements to identify who is behind what and to uncover the network of businesses that enable harms and bad industry to exist. And sometimes this network of corporate enablers behind specific harms reaches also global levels of money flow, with corporate actors linked to the harms, but they are located very far away. And NGO can use this information to either feed them in their advocacy trajectory or to develop campaign. Some of the action that can derive from the corporate research findings are campaigns that target development banks. As I mentioned earlier, many of the development banks, they have social and environmental safeguards that are associated with grievance redress mechanism. For example, within the World Bank Group, financing given to governments by the IDA, one of the agency, or insurance provided by another World Bank agency called MIGA, can be targeted for advocacy through filing complaints to the inspection panel. While with regards to the World Bank Group private lending arms, the International Finance Corporation, there is another watchdog mechanism called the Compliance Advisory Ombudsman. But in addition to targeted development finance, activists can try to do and put pressure on different type of companies. As we've seen before in the SSR casework, companies that buy from an harmful project might be based like in an OECD country. And OECD country do have like guidelines for responsible businesses, and they have and these guidelines are not mandatory for companies themselves, but countries are obliged to set up offices that supervise the implementation of the guidelines. And this guideline includes topics like labor rights, land rights, environmental protection, etc. And therefore, if a buyer or a parent company is based in a OECD country and don't comply with the standards, groups can file complaint to this office called National Contact Point that handles complaints over violation of the standard. Now, I'm not going to go much into the details of the NCP system, but if people are interested to know more on how this provides avenue for redress, there is a series of webinars now organized by a platform called OECD Watch, dedicated to share to activists how to use and how to use NCP and what the OECD guidelines prescribe businesses to do. And you can go to the website of OECD Watch, and there is a list of dates. I think the next one targeted for groups in Latin America should be in the week of starting the 24th of June. I don't remember exactly the date, but you can check on the website to know more. Another example of advocacy that might derive from the findings provided by the counter is to denounce investor, banks, insurance company about the fact that their businesses is contributing to the harms. And campaign development can take different shape, from naming and shaming to social media activity. But again, there is a few jurisdictions that also have strong regulators that prohibits businesses to contribute to harms, even if indirectly. And depending on the country where the corporate actors is operating, groups can also connect with lawyers in those countries and seek advice from these lawyers on the potential to conduct litigation and other legal action on parent company, on banks that provided loans, or buyers. And for example, I mentioned before human rights with diligence legislation coming on in the European space, but also tort law in many Anglo-Saxon jurisdiction. But in some cases, also consumer protection laws alleging misinformation about the sustainability of product can be used by lawyers in those countries. And last example of type of activities targeting consumer-facing brands that buy goods produced as a result of human rights violation and environmental harms. There can also be initially these consumer-facing companies that are connected to the harms can be initially, for instance, approached by asking to use their leverage in their business relation with the offender before escalating to more confrontational tactics. But other potential action can also be engaging with UN human rights bodies, like the working groups on business and human rights, that from time to time engage with government to try to put pressure on regulating the behavior of corporate offenders. Now, it's important to understand that the counter itself is not an advocacy platform, but we are a knowledge-based space that helps groups to find the information. And once we find the information, we can either rely on the requesting organization own network. And in this case, if any of you want to ask the counter for research assistance, I totally believe that this space is made up with lawyers and other experts that can help to activate this advocacy trajectory. And the counter itself can help connect with groups that, for instance, work with development banks or with lawyers in the Netherlands, first of all, but other jurisdictions as well. But now for who is design the counter? So the counter is a platform that helps organization, first of all, that align with SOMO's value on social environmental justice and on an organization that fights corporate-driven interest and capture on natural resources, labor, public goods, services that are captured by corporate interest. We therefore support NGOs and community-based organizations, strategic litigators, and those that work in the law. We also help labor unions and any other form of activists that are in need for corporate research assistance. Our team is focused on helping especially those that could not otherwise obtain this information about who is behind what. So we give priority primarily like to local NGOs, while we do not help business enterprise, individuals or investors that have a financial interest in the target company, or a government agency, or multi-stakeholder initiative, etc., because we believe that they have the financial means to ask for this kind of information and research services to groups that do similar work for a fee. So we prioritize mostly like local groups. Regarding the type of assistance we can provide to activists to enhance the effort to bring corporations accountable for their wrongdoings, some of the questions we can help activists to answer are, for example, how much profits the company are making from this harmful project? Who owns this company? Who is financing them? Do this company have a presence in secrecy jurisdiction where they hide their profits? Where are these companies based? Who are the buyers of these companies? So these are some examples, but there is also a question around how a company can be governed, who is the decision makers, etc. So as far as like your question regarding seeking corporate related information about supply chain relationship, about debts, about hidden profits, about also indication of tax avoidance on secrecy jurisdiction, we can surely help. And but it's also important to understand a little bit how the methodology works, because and I will explain after how you can approach us with requests. So first of all, we conduct a type of follow the money research, and we mainly rely on public available information, meaning like information that are accessible more or less to the wider public, but that they are not easy to find because a little bit of things that are written in small reports, or that people are just don't think about looking there to find those information. And but on the other hand, it also means that we are not hackers. We do not provide information. We are not able to provide information that companies intend to keep private, because for two reasons. First of all, it's because from a risk point of view, we could basically be targeted for breaching code of conduct, etc. but also from an ethical point of view, because providing information that are meant to be private are not very useful for activists to use in their advocacy trajectory. This said, the type of resources we use are a mix of open sources and more subscription-based database. A lot of the research is made by simply looking at Google or any other search engine, because the internet is an incredibly tool. You just need to know a little bit how to make possible certain tailored research. But then we also rely a lot on what the company disclose about their businesses. For example, through their website, through statements they do, through their annual reports, and similar. And a very easy, straightforward resource is also Open Corporates, which is a website that collects information on who this company is, where it's registered, if they are connected to bigger groups, and also corporate registries of specific countries. Corporate registries are basically each country as a place where companies have to register, and they have to at least annually file information about their operation, about their financial performance, etc. And this registry can be free for entry. For example, in the United Kingdom, it's quite transparent. And there is also other registry that provide information for a small fee. Then information can also be found on what public companies file on the stock exchange, and so regard mostly public companies. Then there is news media and industry magazine that report about whether or not a company is involved on a certain project or not. And with regards to trade, there is free platform like the UN Comtrades or a similar one at the EU level that provides information about goods exchange between between countries, not really companies. And aside this opens this, and this is just few examples where there is many others that I could not list in 2 slides. But aside from that, we also have subscription databases, Refinitiv Icon, that is a tool that is used by financial analysts and that we use to investigate mainly public companies. We do have other database like the Orbis that looks at corporate structure, and other database like Global Wits and Expert Genius that help to investigate how companies trade with other companies and therefore supply chain information. I just want to share a little bit of how you can approach the counter with your question. So the first thing is to go to SOMO website. You will have a first arrow called the counter, and you click the drop-down arrow. You go through there is a first page about the eligibility criteria, about who can make requests or not, but this page is for activists, so everyone could approach us to ask for help. And then scrolling down and this page, there is a submit button here, and you click, and this brings you to another little window, which require to create an account, because and it's very simple. You have to put name, last name, email, password, and so that you are able to create an account. And this account is basically the avenue where you can then start filling your request. And once you have created the account, you will have a series of questions, like, for instance, like who you are, which company are you looking for, whether or not you're working with communities, and whether or not there is security issue at stake, because if there is security issue, we can also move the communication to encrypted means of messaging, like Proton Mail or Signal, and it's totally fine if people will not be knowing all the information that you have to put in the fields. And but it's important to know that the more you provide us information in these fields, the more we can understand how to really, what is really like your needs for information. And once you fill in the questionnaire, you are done, and we will take about 2 weeks to assess the request, and if it has more requests, we will basically reply straight away with the research results, or if in other cases we might ask like for follow-up questions. And for example, if the
Luis?
company needs, yes.
Sorry, just one question. Everything is in English. Is there a possibility of filling the questionnaire in Spanish?
Yes, very great question. So you can do this in 2 ways. Either you, through your search engine, like you right click and say translate the page in Spanish. So all the question will be in Spanish. Or here in the Counter websites, there is you scroll down and there is the translation of each of the questions that you have to fill in 3 languages, and one of them is Spanish. So you can basically like look at these documents, and the questions are numbered, and so you can fill in whatever language you feel comfortable with. You don't. If it's in English, you don't have to respond in English. You can just fill in Spanish, and we will process that. Is it clear, Susie?
Thanks.
Yeah. Then after that, like we will. It's important to know that we do not take because I will show you like there is a lot of groups coming to us. Like we do not take research that take months time to investigate. We try to tailor it like to a time frame more or less of total of 10 days, and if the request is very broad or like involve many companies, we will try like to chop it up, to divide it, and start with what is more needed. And the research we will take more or less between 6 and 8 weeks to send you the result of what you asked us for. And here is just like, some numbers, like as I mentioned at the beginning, we have opened this initiative in September, and since then we have investigated more than 120 companies involved in corporate abuses in 60 countries, and the type of companies that we have dealt with range from those that are in the energy and climate session, those that are in the agriculture, agribusiness that cause pollution, mining, and transparency in supply chain relationship. Now, this is really briefly like what I wanted to share about us as a tool for helping groups like you to try to understand who is behind what, and if you want somehow develop a campaign targeted at the responsibility of the business actors. So happy to follow up. I think like, and now just remember about contact details. Like, I mean, Susie, please go ahead, send my email to the group. But just like to clarify, the counter works like through this really a portal. So like, if you have a question about some companies, it would be way easier like if you go through this creating an account, go in SOMO's website, create an account, and make your request there, because that's a system that helps us like to track down groups that approached us. And so this said, like, I'm just gonna quickly 1 minute to share what's I had in mind. Do you see the slides? Right? Yeah. So, okay. So here it's a little list of companies, because again, corporate research can be done by anyone. And you have to start like with a simple question, like what's the name of the company? What is industry? What is the history of the company, if you know? Like get to know like who is the director of the company, and then you can scale up with more sophisticated, let's say, company a question about like how is it organized, if it has like companies in other sister company in other jurisdiction, if these companies that are connected to the harmful company are private, public, and so on and so on. Now, like some tools that you can use, like I mentioned before, like you are trying to know more about specific company, you have to just start Googling. And by Googling like combination of keywords like, company name, mother company, or financing or projects. So this combination of words, like just start to read media article, and you actually start building on the what you didn't know before. And it's also important to keep track. Like I usually just take a Word document and copy paste all the information I find useful and keep the link to that media article. But then there is also other tools behind the internet that is, company websites. They can be like very overwhelmed with information. If the companies are public, stock exchange, they are open sources. I talked before about open corporates, and here, like under Registros de Empresas, I share a link from another organization called OCCCPR. They basically have a website portal where they list all countries' resources to find information about companies. So if you are interested, like to a company in Luxembourg, you just scroll down Luxembourg, and there is a good number of resources to try to find information about that Luxembourg company. Then there is also more specialized websites, like if you look going after financial information, Yahoo, Finance Yahoo, it's actually like very good. Bloomberg, it's another one. Then if you are asking yourself whether or not the company that you are looking at or its parent company have received financing from development banks, there is this debit data science. It's a data scraper developed by the University of Chicago, and there is a lot of data. Similarly, like also if you want to find information about the shareholders, And the last one, it's about some tools about trades. So again, unfortunately, here in Europe, it's already quite late, so I won't be able to assist you during like the legal clinic session going through this. But this is just like if my presentation created a little bit of curiosity about how you could also do these things, like this is a start. And if you reach a point and you have information gaps, the counter is there to assist. And also picking up on the idea of our friend before, like if you want to create the space for a dedicated capacity building workshop on how to do research, we are happy to talk about it.
¿Vale? Creo que vamos a terminar esta sesión porque ya es la hora de comer y si no nos quedamos sin comer. Luis, thank you so much for your generosity, and I think this really practical session I think has been very useful. Let's just give an applause to him.
Gracias mucho por la oportunidad. Estamos a estar en contacto. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Luis. Y let's have a follow-up call, and we can sort of share more. Un abrazo fuerte, Luis. Take care. Adiós.
Por favor,